volunteer of the GIC. The GIC was established in 1999 to promote intercultural understanding among local and international residents for various programs and projects. This weekly GIC Talk series is one of our major programs, and every week volunteer speakers share their knowledge about culture, history, politics, and art. It is wonderful that the GIC Talk has been happening since 2003, so the willingness and support of so many volunteers. So nowadays, many people suffer from stress, and it makes them tired, depressed, and even ill. I think many of you have stress because of various problems, yes, and also have the know-how to get rid of that. First speaker, Olympia, is doing a PhD in educational psychology at the University of Utah. And he's going to talk about mental health through some theories and techniques. And let's welcome him with a big hand.
Well, thank you very much for, let's hope this works, technology. Amazing. As the hostess indicated, I want to welcome you all here. I hope that I have the correct Korean welcome word. Okay, and I want to thank you all for coming. I know it's wet out and it's hard to get here, so I appreciate you coming by. I want to thank Professor Shin from Cheonam National University for facilitating this, and also some of the staff and the faculty from Cheonam for allowing me to visit your wonderful country for the last 2 years. And also, I know we have several people in the audience who are just getting to know you, and I'm pleased that you're all here. I want to first say congratulations to South Korea for the Winter Olympics. I come from Salt Lake City, Utah, and we had the Winter Olympics 1 year. I was a volunteer there and had an excellent experience. And I think if you have an opportunity to volunteer as part of the activities, I really encourage you to take it. You'll meet people from many different cultures there. So this is going to be very exciting for South Korea. I think the South Korean speed skaters will be victorious.
Yes.
Okay. My background, I'm an associate professor in psychology at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. My area is school psychology. So I work with young children and teenagers, children with disabilities, children with learning problems or emotional and behavioral problems. We have something called autism or Asperger's disorder. Many of our students do research in autism and Asperger's disorder at the University of Utah. Before I came to the University of Utah, I worked in schools. That was my job, to be in an elementary school, middle school, high school, working with teachers and parents. And so I was fortunate enough to begin teaching at the university about 11 years ago. Okay. This summer, I'm at Cheonam National University as part of international summer school. And so having kind of a fun experience there as well for the last 3 or 4 weeks. My interest in South Korea is very recent. And one of the nice things about working at a university is you get to kind of follow your own interests. And so I became interested in South Korea primarily because of the educational performance that came to my attention. And many of you are, I'm sure, are aware of this, is that South Korea has a much higher graduation rate, for example, in high school. Phenomenal rates of graduation. There are, I think, more PhDs per capita in South Korea than anywhere else in the world, first or second. This is true, okay, according to some of the information I've found. This contrasts somewhat with the United States, I think, where part of my job has been to help students focus on learning and to graduate from high school and to overcome some of their problem areas and have a good life. I like to say that's part of what in psychology we aspire to. What we want to promote is helping people have a good life. But our graduation rates are not nearly as high as they are in South Korea. Some schools maybe 60, 70% graduation from high school. So we worry about those students. I think, again, I've been amazed at the level of technology, the level of education, the level of even engineering. Just looking outside, not probably 500 feet from this door, there's a huge complex going up in the middle of town. I came from Incheon. The cranes are everywhere, building. That's spectacular. I think, this is a very rapidly expanding economy, and lots of opportunities or demands on students to be highly educated. Okay. I think this is even more impressive when you think about some of the obstacles that South Korea has had to overcome. I went to several museums last summer. It was the anniversary of the end of the Korean War, I believe, and some of the pictures were amazing. And some people here probably remember that time, when it was very hard for many people living in South Korea. And to have come that far in the short space of maybe 40 years or so is truly amazing, I think. And so this is, I think, a truly modern society that we have here. And it is clearly on a par with many modern societies in the world. So my area is mental health. And we talk about mental health. Primarily in the United States, we have focused on mental health from a mental illness perspective, where we have spent a lot of time looking at problems and all the different kinds of problems that people have. Okay? And typically, psychology serves people who are the most severely affected. Okay? Many people have problems with depression or stress, and they overcome those problems. Okay? But there are people who do not. Okay? And that for various reasons, they have lots of difficulty. And this difficulty has been the focus of much of psychology in the United States. So what we know about disease prevention and health promotion is a fairly recent area in the United States in terms of research. Okay? If we define mental health, okay, it is the successful performance of different mental functions, resulting in productive activities, fulfilling relationships with other people. We kind of presume that part of being mentally healthy is having good relationships with people. It's also a way that the ability to adapt to change. Think about adapting to change and to cope with adversity. And when I think of modern society, both in the United States and in South Korea, I think of the pressures that people have to adapt to change and how sometimes, that can be a challenge, but sometimes it can create problems for people. Okay? Mental illness, as I said, refers to this stress or impaired functioning. And we have different examples of that. People become depressed. They have difficulty focusing. Sometimes in the United States we say that somebody, if you've ever heard the expression, somebody went postal. Have you ever? It means that someone has had a major breakdown and they become very angry or upset. Maybe their boss has been too harsh with them, or maybe their teacher, has been very critical of their abilities. Okay, and so this is often associated with distress or impaired function. Okay, people also have mental health problems, everyday kind of living problems. About 3 months ago, my mother passed away. It was very sad. That was an example of bereavement. I was very depressed. Okay. Many people in my family were sad because we all loved her. And I think I still get a little sad when I think about her, because she was someone that I loved. So these are kind of problems in everyday living. Sometimes we have, students that get a lot of homework. Another example, okay, or want to do really well on tests and exams, and they put in effort, and somehow they get a lower grade than they expect. Okay, that's maybe a temporary kind of a situation. In most cases, people kind of pick themselves up. Maybe they're sad for a while, or they're angry, maybe they're mad at themselves, and they learn how to cope with that. Okay? Part of what I'm interested in is early intervention, and particularly in my work with children and teenagers. We think that's a good point to begin thinking about intervention for not just mental illness, but also kind of just general mental problems that people have in everyday living. Okay? When we look at how often problems occur in the United States, I think some people think that actually things are getting a little tougher, that we're seeing higher rates of mental illness and mental problems in our young people. Some of the studies that have been done in the last 5 years, we look at 21% of children in the United States, ages 9 to 17, any given time, we can diagnose them with a mental health disorder. 26% in another study meet a criteria for a psychiatric disorder. Okay. So all of these, they seem to hover around, let's say, 15 to 20% estimates. Okay. That's a reason to be concerned, I think. Here's an example of a university. A great university like Harvard University is acknowledging that sometimes students at Harvard become very stressed and they can't perform. Okay? So here's a student that couldn't finish term papers because of depression or anxiety. Missing exams because of meltdown. So these are things that have happened, and they do happen in the United States. Okay? I look at Korea, and I also have an idea that sometimes that this is an issue in South Korea as well, that we have symptoms of stress that are kind of tied to these high cultural expectations. You know, the very things that we value, hard work, industry, technology, require a lot of effort. And it puts pressure on people, you know, to do well. And so sometimes people are not prepared as well for pressure, okay? I think one barometer of this is, the high suicide rates, particularly in South Korea, that have increased significantly in the last 10 years in South Korea. Enough that it is being recognized as a national concern by the government. And what I have read is that the government is trying to make it harder for people to hurt themselves. So they will not allow certain stories. If a famous movie star has, you know, committed suicide because of pressure, that can't be on the news, or that somehow it's, you know, edited, that information, or, you know, not being able to buy certain kinds of poisonous substances. It's not as easy to do that anymore in South Korea. So there is a response. I also think that in my short time in South Korea, I think some of the traditional Western philosophies and treatment models are not very appropriate. Okay? I think, for example, in the United States, if I become depressed, I go to a doctor. The doctor says, here, take a pill. If you take the pill, you'll feel better. In South Korea, I don't think it's as easy to convince people to take medication. Okay? And I'm not so sure it's such a good idea either. In my state of Utah, we have, I think, one of the highest consumption rates of antidepressants. We like to think it's a happy state because everybody takes pills. But I think part of it is, I mean, in Utah, we also have very industrious people. There's a lot of pressure to perform. And so sometimes when you can't meet expectations, you begin to, you know, think maybe I'm not good enough, or, you know, maybe you think very critically of yourself. So that's when people become depressed. Okay? I think in Asia and in South Korea, I think there's also, if I mispronounce this, please let me know. But there's something called Han, okay, where, you know, it's stoicism, where we must, you know, endure. And I think, you know, that is a very admirable quality, certainly. But when it comes to sort of mental health matters, okay, sometimes it's not enough. Okay? I think of young people who work very hard. I was just up at Incheon International High School in Incheon, and I see students that work extremely hard. And I think of the value that they represent to the country. And I certainly don't want those people, you know, thinking that they're not good enough, because I think they are good enough, you know. But sometimes because of this self-critical approach, or, you know, they don't quite know how to deal with some of the pressures that they're experiencing. So, when we talk even about treatment, sometimes even the people who need treatment don't get it in the United States. You know, about 20% of the people who actually would benefit from treatment get it, because we have, sometimes it's the most severe problems that get treatment. So in my career, I've worked with students that are very severely depressed. And, if they need help, we put them in a hospital. And we give them treatment. But sometimes they don't have enough insurance. So we have to figure out how to pay for this in the United States. Sometimes there are certain cultural barriers, even in the United States, to getting access to treatment. Geographical location or family characteristics. We have many single-parent families in the United States. And it's very hard for example, a single mother to keep a job and then be able to have a child go to see a specialist, once a week for treatment. We know that if we let certain things continue, that it affects things like achievement. People who are depressed have lower motivation. They don't have as much interest in activities. They increasingly become withdrawn from their peers, from the very people that could help them. Social support is an important intervention for depression. We know even in some cases students will drop out. Sometimes I find myself when I was working in the school running after students, trying to pull them back in school or to have them feel better about what they were doing in school. Anxiety and achievement, same thing. People are nervous about doing well. They might begin to avoid school. School refusal, these kinds of things. Even in college, sometimes we have students. I'm a training director for a graduate program in school psychology. So I always see students who are under pressure. They have to come up with tuition money, those kinds of things. And sometimes they're anxious. They're always anxious about completing a dissertation. Okay? That's a number one cause of dropping out of graduate school is, I think, anxiety about finishing your thesis or dissertation. So, American psychology has focused on a lot of what doesn't work. There are things that are not working. People who are anxious, people who are depressed, will develop other kind of symptoms. Okay, there's a problem, I think, with having that kind of focus. We spend very little time talking about virtues. How can people look at virtues as a way of helping them achieve? What about aspirations or the psychological types? Okay, what about the things that we do really well? And what do we know about things like optimism and hope and other qualities? People would say we're learning more, but we certainly don't know as much as what we know about problems. In fact, I'll show you, this is the journals in psychology. Okay? Looking at articles with the word anger in them, 5,000 articles. Anxiety, 41,000. Depression, 54,000. Let's talk about joy, happiness. Okay, only 415, 1,700 articles. What about life satisfaction? Okay, very few. In fact, the ratio is 21-1. Problems versus positive psychology. Okay, so we think psychology needs help. Okay, this is an unhealthy ratio. But it does reflect perhaps some reality. We have many people that have symptoms of these disabilities. Depression it seems like when we look at our populations, that it's higher. You would think in a modern society, we have things like cell phones. We have iPhone. We have iPads. Okay? Anytime anybody wants to get a hold of you, they can find you. Okay? No matter where you are. My boss can call me here in South Korea. And she could yell at me here, but she won't. I hope she won't yell at me. So this is a concern. The mean age for depression is actually getting lower. Okay, when we look at incidence rates for some of these problems. So the question is, can we do better? Can we think differently about some of these issues? And I consider myself to be relatively new to this way of thinking. So I don't have all the answers. And you may be surprised to hear a university professor say, I don't have all the answers. But I'm being honest with you. I'm still learning about this. So let's talk about the at-risk population. Typically the questions we ask are, why do people fail? Because they're depressed, they're anxious, and so forth. Okay, positive psychology, what makes people succeed despite unfavorable circumstances? Okay, I think about South Korea, again, in this transition from the terrible time of the post-Korean War era. I think we have qualities like grit and determination, that have helped people overcome some of those obstacles. And I think there's a lot of value in looking at some of those qualities now to see how they might sort of match up with a modern society, which is now creating additional demands for people differently. Okay? Thankfully, no one's shooting at us. Hopefully, I guess. So why positive psychology? Okay, we have this disease model, and now we want to focus on creating a good life, building the best life that we can. And so when we talk about positive psychology, topics like gratitude and forgiveness come up. Okay? Some of the things that I'm interested in have to do with teaching young children sort of ways to identify people that they may be grateful to, and even young adults, okay, and how to express that in some systematic way. We look at other concepts like flow or savoring, identifying joy and gratitude in our current life. How many people here have heard of the term flow? Okay, not too many people in this audience, but I like to use the example of an artist. If you can imagine an artist who is working in a studio and they lose track of time. They enjoy what they're doing, so much so that they just have this intense experience of pleasure. Okay? Flow is what happens when you match skill with a challenge. So that a person has a certain level of skill, but they also have a challenge. I don't experience flow when I change my oil in my car. Okay? Because it doesn't really, it's not very challenging. Okay? But sometimes I experience flow when I'm talking with a group. Because I think, I have some good information. It seems like, nobody's falling asleep yet. And so I feel like I'm having a sort of a flow experience at times. Okay? And it's a very reinforcing experience when you have a flow experience. Okay? So something that we do in positive psychology is promote this process of flow. We help people identify, this whole notion of a flow experience and where you find them. Okay? Chances are, you mentioned that our host, before the presentation, she said, I work for Disney. And I worked in the United States as a costume designer. Or something, while you were designing something for Disney. And so I would just imagine that she had some good flow experiences there. Someone would have to tell her, stop working, it's time to go home. But she says, no, I want to keep working. Okay, that's a flow experience. Okay. We also talk about things like optimism and hope and creating kind of this sense of optimism about the world. Now you might think, sometimes it's not a very optimistic place that we live in. There are lots of problems in the world. But positive psychology is a way of promoting people's strengths, helping you identify your strengths so that you can deal with adversity in the world. Okay? When I got up this morning, I thought, it's raining. Oh no, it's rain. And I woke up, I put on my shirt. I was hoping to keep this shirt dry on my way here. I wasn't too successful. But I began to think, where I live, it doesn't rain very often. So this is fun. I thought rain can be fun. So I think, I try to promote optimism in my own life as well. I try to have an optimistic attitude. When we talk about things that we can change, okay, it's important to think a little bit about things like genetics. We all know that, I'm thankful for my parents and the heritage that they left me. Okay? I think I inherited my father is Italian. And so I tend to use my hands a lot, I think, because I think it must be genetic with Italians. You use your hands a lot. Okay? But there are other things about him that I admire. Okay, that I think I inherited as well. He's still living, and so I'm hoping I inherited his good health genes. Okay? And some of that we don't have much control over, our genetics. Circumstances also create a certain environmental influence for us. And so when we look at the topic of happiness, we think that sometimes about 10% of what happens, how we view the world, is related to our circumstances. There's this big chunk here of what is under our own control and how we understand our own happiness, where we look for reinforcement, how we're reinforced, how we interact with the people around us. Is very important. So we know that if we can promote positive thinking, different ways of promoting positive thinking and optimism, we know that it will affect our health. This is where the science comes in. Okay, people have been looking. Happier people seem to live longer. Okay, that's I'm trying to really be happy here in the last several years, I think, so that I can live longer. Okay? I'm hoping that it will have an impact on my health. Lower rates of depression, lower rates of distress, more resistance to things like the common cold, reduced risk of death from cardiovascular disease. Okay, many people in a modern society experience high blood pressure. This is one of the major drugs in the United States, is high blood pressure medication. Okay? But we work at ways of kind of creating this kind of optimism, looking for flow experiences, and other kinds of elements on the positive side. We don't need to worry about taking depression or medication. We have better coping skills. Typically, happier people have better ways of dealing with adversity. Okay? When we talk about defining happiness, okay, this term subjective well-being, there's a fellow by the name of Martin Seligman that has done an awful lot of work in this whole area of subjective well-being. He has a wonderful website, which actually at Shonam, I had students go to the website and begin to look at their own levels of subjective well-being and what their level of optimism is. Other qualities that we can assess on his website. And I have a link at the very end of the presentation that I will share with you. But this term of subjective well-being is very important. It talks about life satisfaction. How satisfied are you with life? Okay? Believe it or not, like many of us, and I'm probably guilty of this too, oftentimes we think that things like money are related to life satisfaction, or driving a really nice car. And when I was younger, of course, the young people here, we all think, I'd like to get myself a nice sports car. Okay? And if you're really young, you like a nice red sports car, perhaps. I was in Incheon and I saw there were several young people that just bought brand new Mustangs. And I think it was a Mustang Club. And there were convertibles and, And so I think we know now that that's sort of a temporary experience. The last sports car that I bought was when I went to graduate school. And I owned a sports car for about 2 years. And I thought, boy, this is neat. You would drive a sports car and people would look at you and think, whoa, he must be somebody special. But now, I don't think I would buy that sports car again. And I sold it. Now I have an old pickup truck. And I like the pickup truck. Okay? But for a while I thought that having things was related to happiness. Okay? I've since learned that life satisfaction, certainly, there's a certain level of living that money will afford everybody. Okay? I always think having a good espresso, and that's, to me, is satisfaction. Okay? And so I get a lot of satisfaction out of a good double shot of espresso. But anything above that, I would think long and hard, even if I had money, about buying a new sports car. I probably wouldn't do it now. Okay? I think being happy or having high subjective well-being involves having more pleasant emotions than negative moods. Okay? This is a key construct in positive psychology. So if you go to the website, you can educate yourself about your own level of subjective well-being. Okay? This is just a model of mental health that one of my colleagues, Dr. Soldo, developed, where we looked at, this is the traditional mental health, where we have people with a low level of mental illness, people with a high level of mental illness. But we also have this subjective well-being, which is part of positive psychology. We know that people with low levels of symptoms and low levels of subjective well-being, they could be vulnerable. If they had several bad days in a row, they could become depressed. Okay, unless they had some good coping skills. People with low psychopathology and high subjective well-being, we think they're pretty well put together. Okay, and they can deal with adversity. They have neither mental illness or low levels of subjective well-being. This group down here, high psychopathology, or lots of mental health symptoms, and low levels of subjective well-being, those are the people that we look for in traditional psychology. They're the troubled people, okay, who need help, and they need help quickly. Someone who is suicidal, for example, that would be a troubled person. Down here we have people who they may have high psychopathology, but for some reason they are happy. They have good coping skills, or they have found pieces in their environment that have helped them to cope with adversity. Sometimes I think it might be a teacher, it could be a mentor, it could be a special skill that somehow has been a strength for them, and they've used that strength to overcome this tendency with some of these symptoms. Okay? This is a nice way of looking at mental health, I think. And it is currently being written about by Dr. Shannon Soldo at the University of South Florida. A very bright woman. She works in schools, interestingly, with children. When we look at some of the research, so how does this fit? Okay? Most people are going to be in this group here, complete mental health. Okay, we have this group here that are troubled. Think of that 17% that I mentioned earlier. Okay? This group of 13%, they're the people with symptoms, but they've learned how to cope. Okay? And this group here is the at-risk group. In the United States right now, we are spending a lot of time with this group, the at-risk group, and also even with people with complete mental health. We have something called school-wide positive behavioral support, where we're trying to build some of these qualities into everyday life in elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. Okay, so we're not waiting until people have problems when they're adults. How is happiness achieved? I'm going to wrap up here in just a minute. Like a good professor, I always bring more material than I really need. Okay? And we're going to have some time for questions. Okay. But according to Dr. Seligman, he talks about the levels of achieving happiness and describes the pleasant life, the good life, and the meaningful life. And for many years we kind of thought, that only a very small percentage of people could achieve a meaningful life. Okay, where what you do impacts not just yourself or your family, but it impacts the larger community. Okay? And I'll tell you a story about someone that achieved a meaningful life. There's a good movie that you can watch to see it play out in front of you. The pleasant life, life that successfully pursues positive emotions. So people who have a pleasant life experience things like optimism and hope and gratitude, or they promote it in their own lives. Okay? Somebody used the example of George Clooney. You familiar with George Clooney? American movie star, makes lots of money. He goes to Italy. He's surrounded by many beautiful women. You think he has a good life? He has a very pleasant life. Okay? And I think, yes, yeah, we all want to be like George Clooney. But recently, George Clooney has made a big step in his life. I think he began to look at his signature strengths, what his ability to communicate, his ability to command an audience. And those are signature strengths for George Clooney and many people who are actors or in public life. I think he has developed a meaningful life when he goes on television in the United States and he talks about problems of refugees in Darfur. He has brought attention using his strengths to an area that needs attention. There is another story, I'll just relate this to you, a movie that was screened at Sundance Film Festival in the United States last year. I volunteer at Sundance every year so I can get to go to the movies for free. If you're a volunteer, there are benefits. You help people out, you kind of help the community, but you also get to see some pretty good movies. There was a movie there called A Small Act. A Small Act. It was a story about a Swedish woman who worked in Sweden as a teacher. And she sent, as part of, she just felt like this was the right thing to do, she would send off $10 every month of her paycheck to an organization that paid for young African students to go to high school. And one of the student that she sent money to was a young African who would never be able to complete high school unless he had financial support. Well, he went to high school because of her support. He ended up getting a scholarship to Harvard. And then he went to work for the United Nations Refugee Foundation. And he got involved in helping refugees in Africa. And this was during the Hutus and the Tutsis, I believe. And so he was very involved in promoting education as a way to counteract some of those activities. And he went and he found the Swedish woman that supported him. In high school. It's a very emotional story. I even get emotional just thinking about it now. If you type in Google, just type in A Small Act, and you will get a trailer, and chances are you can download the movie somewhere, okay, in South Korea. I'm sure you can, okay? South Koreans are excellent at technology. So you should see, this is an example of someone who had a meaningful life, I think, because she went outside of her own area in Sweden and helped someone 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 miles away. Amazing story. So, I think I've already gone a little bit over my time. You think? Maybe a little bit, okay. But, so I want to stop here. I'll just let you know, on my presentation, if I go to the very end here, see, this is all this other stuff. But if I went to the very end, I will show you, oops, right there. These are different websites that you can go to and get more information about positive psychology. Okay? Like particularly, if you want to do your own assessment, you can go to this AuthenticHappiness.org and you can enroll. Just you can get a password. Interestingly, you can complete the questionnaires in Korean. Amazing. One of my students pointed this out to me, so I was very happy to see that. So I'll just leave you with this message, and then I'll leave it for questions.
Okay. Talk about how religion plays a role in psychology.
Well, I think religion has played a very strong role in positive psychology. When Dr. Seligman was looking at, ways to identify signature strengths, he went to places like the Quran. He went to places like some of the Buddhist readings. that are available. He went both in Eastern and Western philosophies and tried to identify things that everyone could sort of identify. And I have a slide here that talks about signature strengths. The question is, am I religious? And I would say I grew up kind of in an interesting way. I was a Catholic when I grew up in New York City. And like many young Catholics, I tried to avoid religion as much as I possibly could. It's just when you have, well, I don't know if anybody's had that experience, but sometimes, when you're young, you don't always see the value of things. I would say that I'm much more spiritual than I am religious. I appreciate all religions. I think they have something of value and important to offer people. I think we have constructed religions to kind of guide us. Whether it's Buddhism or Catholicism or even Mormonism. I live in Utah, where we have many Mormons, and I think that they have some strong guiding principles that they use to kind of help them. And so I think, yes.
Excuse me. So I have some people, the way of living live up to the religious get something stress. How do you think about it?
That religion helps them deal with stress?
The living of the religious.
Yes. Yes. Certainly. I think many people will go to a pastor, or many people will go to a minister or someone in their church, for assistance. And I don't, that may be something that we've certainly lost touch with. In the United States, I think church attendance it has gone down, and it tends to go up sometimes. After 9/11 in the United States, many people became spiritual. I think because they were looking for some guidance. I don't always know that they got good advice when they went, to some of those spiritual places, because the United States is a democracy and people have many opinions, and so we have you have to be kind of careful in terms of where you look for guidance. I think there were some preachers in the United States that said we should get rid of the entire Muslim faith. Big mistake, I think. Okay, that's not the kind of spirituality that offers optimism and hope, and that's my opinion. So,
Okay.
and I'll maintain that until I pass away.
Our next question, do you think autism is on the rise, or are we just identifying it more now?
Depression is on the rise?
Autism.
Autism. Good question. I think certainly it is being identified much more frequently. In the United States, I think it's one of the fastest growing disabilities. And I'm still trying to get an idea for South Korea and how the South Korean educational system, deals with autism, and if there are similar increases in South Korea. I think for a while we thought that it was, something in the diet, or there was some research out there that kind of seemed to, go in that direction. Then it was kind of repudiated. It was a bad study, and many people were vaccinations. I think was another potential cause. So I think the people that I work with study the genetics of autism. And so they're trying to identify particular genetic markers for things like autism and all of its subtypes, because we look at autism as a spectrum disorder. And so I think our students at the University of Utah, we look at the epidemiology of autism, and we also look at interventions for children with autism. So our schools can do a better job of having them be successful.
In Korea, as anywhere in the world, people suffer from mental illness. But many people don't go to the psychiatrist. Do you have any advice for how someone might deal with it?
In the United States, not everybody goes to a psychiatrist. So I don't think that in South Korea it's that different. I think we have probably more psychiatrists in the United States than in South Korea. So that could be just in terms of accessibility. But I think there is something, that's a little different about the idea of going to someone you don't know and, discussing very personal concerns and problems. That in the Asian way, typically you may go to a family member, a senior person, someone like people in our front row. You have the wisdom of the ages. But I think understanding, things like technology and some of the pressures that occur in a modern society, sometimes our family members don't really understand that very well. My mother, when she was living, really never understood what I did for a living. I would just tell her, I work at a university, and I would show her my computer, and she would go, isn't that interesting? But they don't really understand, perhaps, the nature of some of these issues. If my boss can get a hold of me any time of the day by just dialing my iPhone, and my iPhone rings, doesn't matter if I'm on the beach or anywhere. Okay, that's something that sometimes an older person may not appreciate completely.
Okay. Next question. Teachers in Korea, or maybe anywhere in the world, what can they do to help their students with ADHD?
ADHD. This is often ADHD has been called the American disease. Huh? That's how I've heard of it. But I think when I worked in the schools, this was often the very first problem that a teacher would talk to me about. And I had my office in a school, and I can't get my student to pay attention or to complete work. And before I became involved with positive psychology, I'm really a behavioral psychologist by training. And so we have many ways of helping people stay on task and to complete their work. Sometimes it's a matter of the teacher using more positive reinforcement of one kind or another. Okay. They always make sure that we eliminate other causes of inattention. And I think I've noticed sometimes South Korean students don't get a lot of sleep. Sometimes, because they're working so hard. And so I would like to encourage parents to think a little bit about making sure that children get enough sleep and enough rest so that they're not, they can pay attention. And I think there would be a wide variety of things. I would never say the very first thing would be to take medication, because I think that is a very personal decision for a family or a parent. And sometimes when you start taking the medication, it's something that people will say, well, it's for the rest of your life that you're going to be taking this pill. So I would never encourage that as the first choice. Okay?
Okay. And I'm just going to ask one more question. We're running on 4 o'clock. So last question for today. Can you explain about how important social support is in maintaining mental health?
I think extremely important. When you talk about social support, you also have to include, if you remember Hillary Clinton, President Bill Clinton's wife, she had this phrase about it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I think this is particularly true when, at least in my role as a school psychologist, I think that social support includes not just the mother or the father, but it also includes friends, It also includes teachers. I think teachers often underestimate the impact that they can have on a student. And someone who may invite you to stay after for class and say, I've noticed really that you're struggling with this area. How can I help you? Okay. In the United States, I always tell our elementary school teachers, the ones that I work with, that if I know that someone that they had a problem with when they were being taught by that teacher, and I know that they do well, I always go back to the teacher and I say, you would be very impressed with what your student is doing now. And I use Facebook sometimes. I'm on Facebook. So students that I do in elementary school, they track me down. Oh, what a surprise. Okay? And then they tell me about what they're doing in their life. Maybe they've had children. Maybe they've had, success in school. They have a nice job. But when they were in elementary school, they were a problem. So they had a hard time paying attention. So I always like to tell the teacher when I hear that information. I like to keep in touch with students. So I would say that's something I would encourage teachers to do, is to look at the people that you work with as an investment and encourage them to come back and let you know how they're doing, or even if they have a problem, to help them solve the problem. Teachers can be a very meaningful influence in a student's life. Professors also. I met one of Dr. Shin's students at Shonan University.
She gave a talk last Saturday here.
She did.
Yes.
The person who was here last week gave a talk, and we just met at the gate at Shonan University. And she had so many good things to say about Dr. Shin. And I mean, almost embarrassing. I don't want to embarrass you, but I think you made a very big impact on her life. And again, it kind of shows the importance of social support. Okay? I'm having on like 5 minutes over.
Oh, that's okay.
That's good. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your presentation, and we prepare a certificate of appreciation for you, and this will be given by Dr. Iyagiga, the Director of the International Center.
This must mean that you're a big shot here.
A small shop.
Okay.
In fact, we have now 17 professors from overseas at Jeonnam National at the moment. It's 17 or 18. So
17?
I think 17. So if we have more Saturdays, then we can invite them all, one after another. But we have only 3 or 4 Saturdays. So next week we are expecting Professor Price, Andrea. So, but we are lucky enough to have you, as well as many others. But we are not lucky enough to have 17 weeks.
Oh,
Invite them all.
yes.
I wonder why they only chose you over other people.
I have no idea.
For our psychological health.
Yeah.
So our health has become better after this talk. And then our children as well, our friends as well, because they can expect our support.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this. Then, simply letter of appreciation, Professor Daniel Olympia. We want to thank you for your support to Gwangju citizens as a guest speaker at GIC talk on July 19th with the topic of modern society and medical health. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. And the next GIC talk is the 21st century journalist as a global citizen. It will be given by Andrea Hillis. And there is one more announcement. There is GIC Myung tour with Warren, who has better knowledge on Korea than Korean. And the date is July 16th. So we open the reservation until July 14th. So for your more information, please refer to our website. We are looking forward to your participation. And I hope you learn more about GIC. I want to introduce our GIC. The GIC was established in 1999 to promote intercultural understanding among local and international residents through their programs and projects. If you would like to learn more about the GIC or support GIC as a member or as a volunteer, please feel free to talk to our coordinator or volunteers. They are all wearing name tags like this, and I hope to see you next week. Have a great weekend. Thank you.